The right of freedom, life, and safety is a human right expressed in the international law of human rights, according to which it is forbidden to prevent any person from running normal life or killing them or even torturing them abusively. The Fourth Geneva Convention, 1949, bans assault on civilians during war times. The convention stipulates in two amendments protocols to protect medical crews and humanitarian relief staff, thereof assuring the principles of movement and working on necessary facilitations for the work of carrying wounded people to hospitals to be carried out.
The
implementation of Fourth Geneva Conventions, including protection of civil populations, medical facilities, medical crews, is the responsibility of official authorities and conflict parties. As to the other two Geneva Convention amendment protocols signed in 1977, the first protocol granted enhanced special protection to medical crews and medical facilities. It doesn't only underline the importance of doing no harm to medical crews, but also facilitating their job.
The International Committee of Red Cross tried to protect the international law during war times. Occupied Palestine is considered one with the highest exposure rate to daily killing and suppression. Thus, the committee has been keen to report to the occupation army about their daily practices during military campaigns and ongoing shelling of cities and suburbs of West Bank and Gaza Strip. One of the key practices is hindering the medical crews from reaching out to the victims and wounded people who were deprived from having access to life-saving needed medical care.
Yes, there were civilian victims, but we at the International Committee of the Red Cross tried as possible to improve performance and work capacity to meet the field needs then. We've made hundreds of times for humanitarian medical permissions, including permission for ambulances to access areas targeted by heavy warfare, sustaining severe damage among population. We tried to get the ambulances reach the victims as soon as possible.
In the El Dor area of Betlatia, the ICRC found two martyrs. We were told to go retrieve them, and that took from 9 in the evening till 2 in the morning. I am certain they were injured, but due to the long wait and bleeding, their blood drained, and they died. I am sure the Israelis made us wait until they were dead. I saw the tanks passing by them back and forth until they died, and then they allowed the ambulance to the area.
Ambulance driver Khalid used to retrieve bodies of martyrs from incident scenes, but he faced something much more difficult than that when he received a call to head to Beit Lahia in northern Gaza to evacuate some wounded people.
We were advised there were injuries in the Beit Lahia roundabout. Myself and two other medical staff went to the scene. At first glance, we saw injured young men on the ground. We started to carry them, and both legs of the first man I carried were amputated. 10 to 15 meters ahead, we found another injured person. The guys in the yard were looking at us and yelling at us. We turned around and reversed and went to bring other injured.
Medical staff Harafa and his colleague Ala carried wounded man from the area while their other ambulance driver colleague was reversing the ambulance to get closer to them as they carried the wounded man to be laid in the very same ambulance with other two injuries. Despite the hard situation, they continued their work till the surprise took place.
While I was reversing, the ambulance was targeted. I went out of the ambulance and looked around and saw Arafat, my co-worker, was thrown on the side, and Allah, another helper, was nowhere to be found. I looked at the injured guy they were carrying and found him headless. Another ambulance came to the area, and together we carried those injured persons on the ground and those who already were in the ambulance and took them to El Wada Hospital in Karma Adwan Hospital. Arafat was hurt, but he was awake and kept bearing witness that there is no Lord but Allah, and Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah. He was immediately sent to surgery, and they kept asking for blood donations until late afternoon. Then we were told he passed away. May Allah forgive him. Targeting or hindering work of ambulances is a war crime. There are international treaties that are supposed to protect civilians and medical crews during war. That said, what happened was direct targeting of an ambulance vehicle. I recall that ambulance officer Marwan Harmoudi was targeted by a sniper and that he was covering a night event. This car was hit by several bullets.
Before talking about his injury, Marwan Hamouda describes how the military operations conducted by Israeli occupation army developed against Palestinian people since Al-Aqsa uprising till today. Then he talks about what he experienced ever since he joined the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. It is beyond imagination.
It's normal that we in Gaza live in a daily war ever since the Al-Aqsa Intifada erupted. There are some intervals of calm, but they are calm before the storm. Throughout my 13 years of service with the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, the Israeli assaults on Gaza have become bigger and bigger. If you were to ask how to imagine the most horrifying thing that ever happened before your eyes, that's what's happening here. And in the future, there will probably be much more horrifying events. There has been an unjust evolution against the Palestinian people, from light tear gas to rubber bullets. Then it became explosive bullets that blew off limbs, then toxic gas and F-16 missiles.
This leap in the usage of weapons had some negative impact at the psychological level, whereas medical crews use the motto, "He left and never came back," whenever they are on the road for a mission during incursions and military operations in the West Bank and Gaza.
أي طلعة بنطلعها إحنا بنكون يعني خلاص.
Whenever we are down on the ground on a mission, we never know if we'll be back. One day, we rushed to the Al Jerem neighborhood after being informed of shelling there. The moment we reached the roundabout, the glass blew up in our faces. I saw a fire in my legs and I was bleeding. Honestly, I am used to rescuing children and women and elderly people, but I've never suffered the pain myself. Today, that day, I felt it the way they did, and I felt the fear. I became an ambulance officer and an injured person at the same time.
صرت أنا عبارة عن ضابط إسعاف في نفس الوقت جريح. أي وجود تحرك على الأرض.
Any moving object on the ground becomes a target. That makes us fearful. That's why they target everything. They do this out of fear, not out of power. It's the result of weakness and cowardice. The horror is that the soldiers shoot at any moving object.
Ali Khalil has been working as an ambulance driver since 22 years now. He saw, heard things that people won't even dream of. He survived death several times. Nevertheless, one of those times he was closer to death than ever.
I was targeted in the El Nada area with an F-16 missile. They hit the area first with unmanned drones that caused a lot of injuries. We reached the area and took the first round of injured. There were many, many injured. Then we came back to the scene. The target was then hit with an F-16 missile again, and we were under it. We were 4 ambulance vehicles, and most of them were damaged. Those of us who were not injured felt totally out of balance.
The International Committee of the Red Cross records such violations and raises public reports to the responsible authorities for these violations and discuss these reports, which aim not to be repeated.
The Israeli occupation army turns its back to the special reports on their violations, whereas their soldiers chill and target medical facilities and staff instead of considering them.
The ambulance station was targeted and burnt by destructive shells. Everything was destroyed. What's the reason? This building has the Red Cross and Red Crescent sign on it. What's the point of demolishing it? It confuses ambulance crews and prevents them from controlling troubled areas. Targeting the site means destroying our command center, and it is likely to disrupt work of the ambulance crews, so they won't be able to carry out their regular jobs.
The Palestinian Red Crescent Emergency and Ambulance Center in northern Gaza serves approximately 350,000 people living there. Those people in dire need to access to medical care to save their lives from widespread death the Israeli occupation causes day and night.
The center was evacuated where we worked, and we continued services to 360 people in Gaza North, who were the more affected. And then we moved on to the south. 2 young men were run over by tanks after they were gunned down. Can you imagine the weight on their bodies? They were cut into 10-centimeter pieces, each taking the shape of a tank chain. The bodies were there for 10 days. I looked around and noticed what I thought was a dummy, to find it was a child. A baby girl's body, totally burnt. Dogs had eaten the limbs, including the arms and legs. The baby was no more than a year of age. She was targeted by white phosphorus bombs. I went crazy with that and reached the hospital in a very psychologically damaged situation.
كنت بوضع نفساني تعبان جدا.
Where are the Muslims? Where is the Islam? Where is the Arabs? Where are all the Arabs? Where are the Muslims?
The vicious practices did not stop. A charred body of a female child being eaten by dogs represented a lifetime memory that was engraved in the mind of an ambulance driver. Occupation Army's crimes continued to hospitals and people inside them.
في كل هجوم من
El Wafa Hospital had its fair share from every Israeli assault in the area. Maybe it's the hospital, but maybe it's the hospital's location. In 2004, the hospital was shot directly at. 2 nurses who were handling a patient were shot dead on the spot.
وقتل 2 على الفور.
Al Wafa Medical Rehab Hospital, run by Al Wafa Charitable Society, is located in eastern Gaza, adjacent to the Palestine occupied in 1948. The Al Wafa Elderly Nursing Home is across from the hospital. The Occupation Army didn't take into consideration the hospital or the elderly center, or to the services they provide to people crippled by disability or elderly people who are not able to help themselves.
The Israelis don't have an appropriate assessment of things. They destroy everything that comes in their ways, especially if it's likely to hinder the tanks from entering a given area. They would probably bring a hospital to rubble. Their considerations are different. They don't have humanitarian consideration. There was daily shelling inside and around the hospital. Even patients inward were targeted. It's Allah's will that saved the patients. We cleared them from room to room, and after 2 hours, we moved them to a safe room, far from the Eastern Road.
نقلناهم إلى غرف آمنة أبعد يعني من المكان اللي على الخط الشرقي.
The peak of Israeli offensives was Gaza War 2008-2009, where Al Wafa Hospital had its fair share from that.
At the outset of the war, there was heavy fire from a wide range of shells that rained on the hospital. There were 35 patients in place, in addition to 25 elderly patients at the elderly nursing home, who normally don't have shelter but for the hospital. It was very difficult to evacuate them because of their medical condition. We and the co-workers shifted them to a safe area because the hospital was being targeted from different sides and also from inside. There was fire inside the hospital due to the close position of the Israeli army that was not far at all from the hospital.
Sameh al-Nadim couldn't come back to his home during the war, whereas he stayed at hospital with helpless patients.
We stayed at the hospital because it was very hard to reach our homes. We were worried about our children, our wives, and our parents. The hospital was targeted with white phosphorus bombs that resulted in huge fires. We were afraid we would end up burnt alongside the patients inside the room. Nevertheless, we were assuring the patients and asking them to be patient and calm.
لكن كنا نطمن في المرضى نقول لهم ما تخافوش وصبروا.
Some of the patients couldn't withstand what was happening at Al Wafa Hospital because the fire was massive and it started to get closer to them. So there was a need to make the right decision at the right time.
كنت أنا وزملائي يعني متوترين جدا.
My colleagues and I were tense. We couldn't carry the patients. We made them crawl and pulled them out of the room to the safe area. We evacuated them through the stairs because the elevator was broken and there was no electricity. My colleagues and I could hardly carry them. A group of patients and elderly people stayed at the hospital, preferring death, as they had no place to go, nowhere to seek shelter or safety. And we had nowhere to go, so we stayed at the hospital.
Al Wafa Hospital was not the only hospital to experience those destructive incidents. Al-Quds Hospital, run by the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, was also exposed to much more destructive events.
The second floor of the pharmacy and the Society Warehouse, Building 101, were targeted in the nights during January 13th and 14th. After that, the pace of violations was 3 or 4 per day, where the warehouses were targeted till we lost the entire building. Ambulances were prevented from accessing the area to rescue children or to evacuate any building at all. The Red Cross reported to us a fierce shelling in the Tel Hawa area, and several civilians were injured inside the hospital. The Red Cross assured us that the Israeli army knew the location of the hospital. We confirmed lack of security in the area, but still the shelling continued and it was fierce. There were 30 or 40 tank shells that fell on the area every minute.
Al-Quds Hospital is located in a heavily populated area in southern Gaza City. People of the area were internally displaced by Israeli occupation army soldiers during the Gaza war, seeking safety and security.
There were 120 medical staff inside the hospital, in addition to 80 other society volunteers. We had about 46 cases and 2 prematurely born babies. We were surprised by residents of the eastern area evacuating their homes and coming to the hospital. People told us the Israeli army had entered their homes and asked them to go to Al-Quds Hospital. The Israeli army knew there were more than 700 civilians. More than 700 children and elderly people came to the hospital and settled in the operating rooms in the basement, which was the safest place in the hospital.
This human gathering, estimated by 1,000 people at Al-Quds Hospital, scared workers who thought that the Israeli occupation army had a pre-intention to commit a massacre that would take the lives of many people who took refuge at the hospital.
The Israeli army targeted the hospital after a large number of people gathered. I confirmed it was a direct targeting, as all visible signs and flags were in place. There was intention to commit a massacre inside the hospital. The first and second buildings of the hospital were targeted. Then they destroyed the 2nd through 6th floors. The fire then reached the basement floor. which posed a risk as it continued from above downward. And then it came into the main building. There was no way that we could continue our work due to the continuous shelling and targeting. We were helpless.
إمكانية إن تحمل الطاقم الطبي أو المرضى الموجودين عندك.
So we decided to take the risk and evacuate this massive number of people before it's too late.
We saw civilians helping injured people. They evacuated them using the medical beds in the streets. Approximately 80 patients were moved this way. That was very dangerous, but we managed to evacuate all injured without coordination. After that, we coordinated with the Defense Department and with civil defense and firefighting, and we put out the fire.